why 9 years ago, when he was a soldier in Germany, he met Priscilla looks with eager interest as the body found by flash near New Orleans.
We are all part of history. Wherever we are and whatever we're doing, world events shape our memories. And for most of the 20th century, those events were filmed and explained by Pathé. Pathé News captured history in motion, creating a living chronicle of a turbulent century. The Vietnam War dominated world affairs during 1967. The year started with the highest American casualty rate of the war so far. In 1 week, 144 servicemen died in the Vietnamese jungles. 1,044 were wounded, and 6 listed as missing. Saturation bombing seemed to be having little effect. The fundamental flaw of American policy, as historians now agree, was that there was little support for the government of South Vietnam amongst the peasant population. American bombing tactics served to alienate the population further, so giving the communists greater advantage on the ground. In America itself, the war began to cause widespread protest. The young men who were being sent off to die at such an alarming rate started to question the reasons for the war. Muhammad Ali, the world heavyweight boxing champion, refused to accept his draft into the army. He argued that no Vietnamese had ever abused him because of the color of his skin. The civil rights movement in America seemed confused and divided. An increasing number of black activists saw violence as the only means of making significant headway against entrenched racial attitudes. The poverty of many ethnic groups in inner-city areas had caused a series of vicious riots in major American cities. In 1967, Detroit erupted into violence. Vietnam was the first war to be brought onto the nation's TV screens daily, and coupled with the violence on the streets of the country's cities, there was a growing concern about the fate of the nation itself. 1967 was also the year of the Six-Day War in the Middle East. On June 5th, General Moshe Dayan launched what was called a preventative campaign against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. The cause of the war was Egyptian moves against the UN peacekeeping force which had been established after fighting in Sinai during 1956. Israel could see that Arab forces were concentrating on her borders and decided to act swiftly to prevent invasion. The Egyptians were also blockading an important sea route to Israel, and so Dayan gave the order to attack. On June 5th, airfields in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Jordan were attacked and Arab air power virtually wiped out. In Sinai, Israel moved against Egyptian tanks, and by the 7th of June, Israeli forces had reached as far as the Suez Canal. On the same day, the whole of the West Bank in Jordan was occupied. Israel had suddenly expanded its territory and now had jurisdiction over another 600,000 Palestinian Arabs. It was a famous victory, but one which would leave a legacy of conflict. Palestinian liberation movements could see no other alternative but to fight Israel with ever-increasing levels of violence.
Pressmen wait for Lord Snowden to appear to answer their questions. His private life has been the subject of rumors throughout the American press recently, and on his arrival from Japan, where he has been on a photographic assignment for his paper, he was besieged by batteries of probing newsmen. Lord Snowden displayed admirable self-control as he explained there was no truth in speculations about his personal affairs. He is to join Princess Margaret in the Bahamas for a holiday. The Boston Stranglers' escape from a mental institute, this was his cell, sparked off a 30-hour wave of terror throughout New England. The escapee, Albert DeSalvo, claims he committed at least 13 murders around Boston. From the asylum with DeSalvo went 2 other inmates. Snow tracks led to their quick recapture. But DeSalvo avoided the police. The breakout was effected with a duplicate key. But eventually, the self-confessed murderer gave himself up. Now he has been transferred to a maximum security prison where he also received psychiatric treatment. Return to Earth. The scorching, perilous moments faced by spacemen. Whether Russian or American, the men of space have to meet this final challenge. For one, it meant death. Colonel Vladimir Komarov, the man history books will record as the first cosmonaut, killed during a space flight. As he trained for what Western observers believed was to be a major step towards a moon landing, Colonel Komarov already knew the hazards of space. In 1964, he had piloted a 3-man spacecraft. Vladimir Komarov, like Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, was a hero. Gagarin had paved the way for all mankind. But his achievement was the start of what is now being quoted as a senseless space race. All are heroes who leave our planet in the name of progress. But progress has its price. An American space program, a Russian space program. How much better if mankind pooled its knowledge in the race for the moon, instead of nations competing with each other for the same goal. Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, refused to take the American Army oath. He maintains that his religion won't allow him to kill people of his own color in Vietnam. As his kind of conscientious objection is not recognized in the States, Cass the Gas may have the law book thrown at him with a possible $10,000 fine or 5 years in prison. Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol must be the proudest man in the world, especially when he entered into the Jordanian sector of Jerusalem and to stand before the Wailing Wall. To world jury, a deeply emotional occasion of great historic importance. Hero today of the Jewish peoples, General Moshe Dayan, defense minister and architect of the swiftest, most overwhelming victory of all time. In the Sinai Desert, in the wake of Egypt's catastrophic retreat, lie Nasser's wrecked tanks. More tanks than were destroyed in the early Alamein campaign. Inspired by General Dayan, 4 Israeli commanders achieved the great triumph. Gavish, the commander-in-chief, Jaffa, Sharon, and Tal. When Sharm el-Sheikh, at the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba, fell to the Israeli forces, it shattered Nasser's attempt to blockade the Gulf. The desert tank graveyard will bear evidence of the sheer futility of Nasser's military aspirations till the sands of time obliterate the wreckage. The whole world hopes that from great victory and utter defeat, wisdom will emerge and bring lasting peace to this part of the world.
Tasmania. Food, equipment, clothing, and the essentials for living are flowing into the fire-ravaged island. From all over the world, aid in the form of money and goods is helping to put stunned Tasmanians back on their feet. Red Cross and other welfare workers keep hard at it to restore hope for people who lost everything in the raging inferno, fanned by high winds which swept across the island. Scenes such as this were commonplace. Many died. More than 600 homes and farms were destroyed. Desperate efforts to save belongings were futile. Too often, all that could be done was to stand and watch as a precious home died in the flames. Now the flames have gone. Ships from the mainland bring in supplies and the fight for recovery is on. Help is on the way. But Tasmanians can never forget the horror of the enveloping flames that took their homes and loved ones.
Glassboro, New Jersey. Could it be that a meeting in this homely setting will make the world a safer place for us all? Until recently, Glassboro was just a dot on the map. Then suddenly the world focused on it. 2 men, both with enormous power, decided to meet here and talk, exchange views for peace in a troubled world. So with the arrival of President Johnson, history came to the little hamlet 15 miles from the city of Philadelphia. Far from the White House and much further from the Kremlin, President Johnson and Mr. Kosygin had at last met. Hollybush, a modest Victorian villa, home of the president of Glassboro State College, had suddenly become a summit meeting place. In spite of the mantle of security which immediately settled around the house, the atmosphere of homeliness could not be destroyed. Lunchtime talk included the Middle East crisis, Vietnam, and closer links between the 2 powerful nations. Away from the corridors of power, it seemed both could talk like friends. Outside, the world waited. At last they appeared, 2 men with the weight of world problems on their shoulders, but looking relaxed, like men who had enjoyed a good lunch and a youthful chat. President Johnson confirmed this. He told the people of Glassborough and the press of the world that the talks had led to progress for better understanding. Mr. Kosygin showed his approval for the way things had gone. For all of us, this friendly gesture was a welcome sign indeed. Let us hope that Glassborough may earn the name the home of peace. America. Jane Mansfield is dead. Here with ex-husband Mickey Hargitay and their 2 children, she was one of Hollywood's greatest sex symbols. At 33, she had been married 3 times and was the mother of 5 children. 3 of them were with her in the fatal car crash near New Orleans. They escaped slightly injured. But Jane, her lawyer friend Sam Brody, and their driver were killed. Throughout her entire career, she was rarely out of the headlines. Wherever she went, even at a royal film performance, she attracted pressmen. No one can deny she had a flair which gave entertainment to cinema millions. Italy. Man Mountain, the Ambling Alp, Satchel Feet. Whatever the nickname, it meant Primo Carera, the biggest man ever to win the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship. Now, at 60, he is dead. Exactly 34 years to the day after he won the title from Jack Sharkey. When his boxing days were over, the huge 18.5-stone giant returned to wrestling, his first love. But whether it was boxing or wrestling, Carnera was a great entertainment. At last, Primo Carnera has lost.
Detroit. It looked like the wartime blitz on London, but this was no war. It was arson, looting, a race riot blown up into something beyond control. At nighttime, anarchy took the city in its grip, and with authority powerless, looting by bands of both races added a new dimension to terror and lawlessness. Harlem, New York's Negro quarter, began to emulate Detroit. Rioting here is no new thing, but New York's police feared that this one might dwarf anything known before. All over the country, law-abiding people looked to the president for a lead, but Washington was a long way away. For the moment, it was a battle, authority against crime on the rampage. The federal government is determined to grapple with all this evil has been made crystal clear by President Johnson.
We will not tolerate lawlessness. We will not endure violence. It matters not by whom it is done or under what slogan or banner. It will not be tolerated.
Atlantic travelers said there had never been a ship to equal the Queen Mary. Our own sister ship was slightly bigger. The liner United States was faster. But in the affections of millions, the Queen Mary had first place. New York gave her the warmest of fond farewells. For the heroine of 1,000 Atlantic crossings, Mayor Lindsay had already presented to Captain Treasure Jones a bronze medallion and commemorative plaque. On board was a Pathé camera team to capture the final scenes of a sentimental journey, which will be shown in our next edition.
Gibraltar. 254 years ago, the Rock became British. A treaty signed then stated that the Union Jack was to fly over these shores for all time. So naturally, the people of Gibraltar have very strong views on Spain's demand that Gib become Spanish territory. To demonstrate their feelings, they smothered their homeland in a mass of red, white, and blue, adapted Churchill's bulldog breed slogans, and set out en masse for the polling stations to let the world know that they were proud to be British and nothing was going to change that. So on Sunday, September 10th, 1967, Gibraltarians let loose with one of the warmest, most emotional pro-British demonstrations the world has known for many years. The population of this land, which has played such a key role in both world wars, was making news once more on an international scale by proving its unswerving loyalty to the Crown. It was like a marvelous, wildly happy carnival. And there was was the result? A resounding yes in favor of staying with Britain. Of 12,182 votes cast, only 44 were against Britain. Who was it who said, as solid as the rock? Crowded streets in the city, any city across the breadth and depth of the nation. For the United States is in the midst of a population boom. Every 8.5 seconds, a new citizen gets a slap on the back and lets the new world know he's arrived to join the ranks of the birth bonanza. And so, at the Washington Census Bureau, President Johnson waited for the population indicator to clock up the country's biggest all-time score of 200 million people. Slowly, the indicator crept up to the grandest grand total in the history of the United States. And there it was. The signs show the dramatic increase of America's population in under 200 years. And experts reckon that at the current rate of birth acceleration, a 300 million total is possible by the turn of the century. But they couldn't care less what the figure is or will be. That's for the grown-ups to worry about. His main concern is not millions of mouths to be fed, just one, his.
In Britain, the Labour Party, newly strengthened by a massive election victory in 1966, tried to deal with the country's recurring economic problems. Harold Wilson had proved to be a fast-thinking Prime Minister, but all his mental agility could not ward off the economic storms which buffeted his government during 1967. A sterling crisis in July prompted the government to seek spending cuts and wage restraint. Britain's military commitments in the Far East, in the area known as East of Suez, began to be withdrawn so as to save money. At home, Wilson had tried a voluntary pay restraint formula, but the unions opposed him, and so he imposed a 6-month freeze on all pay. Meanwhile, Wilson was also trying to negotiate Britain's entry into the common market. However, General de Gaulle didn't think Britain ready for entry, and was suspicious of the close Anglo-American relationship that Britain continued to foster during the 60s. Foreign problems and a dock strike at home made economic matters worse, and the currency was in danger of collapse. The government had been trying desperately to avoid a devaluation, but in November of 1967, the inevitable happened. Sterling was devalued for the first time since 1950. The pound now bought only $2.40 instead of $2.80. In 1950, it had been worth $4.03. These were the days of managed exchange rates, the days when a devaluation was seen as a humiliation for Britain. Within a couple of decades, daily fluctuations in currency rates would be accepted as normal. But in 1967, the government was badly harmed by the move. Jim Callaghan felt it necessary to resign. However, Wilson was convinced that things would improve in time for the next election. To soften the blow, Wilson made his famous statement that devaluation would not affect the pound in your pocket. Few believed him, and within days, General de Gaulle issued another stinging blow with a no to Britain's entry into the EEC.
It was soon after dawn that Bluebird was got ready for the record attempt. There was little wind, the water was smooth. The evening before, Donald Campbell drew the ace and queen of spades, the deadly shadow of remorseless fate. He was a superstitious man. Dedicated, his mission in life coming before everything. The Orpheus jet was easily capable of driving Bluebird at 300 miles an hour. British, the record had to remain. He had driven his sports car for the last time. Though on that perfect first run, there was no hint of tragedy. They timed him at 297 miles an hour. With luck, the new record would be his. But luck had run out. Fate was to strike. The Victorian clock tower will soon be all that's left of the Caledonian Market. The 32-acre site is being developed. The market was closed in 1939. In its day, it was a link with the London of bygone times. Modern ways of marketing made it obsolete. At one time, the Caledonian was a great cattle market. The stallholders rushed to get the best pitches like bargain hunters at sales time. Pretty well everything was bought and sold. The cattle market was only part of it. This was a real bit of old London. Thousands will be sorry when the only reminder of it is the clock tower.
Glasgow, the great Scottish city, left it in no doubt that north of the border, Mr. Kosygin has a host of friends. In St. George's Square, it was friendship first, security apparently second. The Russian premier seemed to revel in it. On the program was a visit to the world's biggest nuclear power station, Hairdressing, 30 miles from Glasgow on the Ayrshire coast. Here as everywhere during the brief Scottish visit, Alexei Kosygin was almost on backslapping terms with the crowd, though nobody came forward to hold hands. Even here, the visitor was anxious to see as much of the ordinary people as time allowed. When Mr. Kosygin went to Kilmarnock football ground to see the home side play Rangers, he was taken into every Scotsman's heart. Football is football nearly all the world over. Seeing their favourites introduced, the fans thought that if Russia can match them, it's to be congratulated. A great visit. Another time perhaps he'll come for Hogmanay. That Aleutian airliner at Gatwick meant all too clearly that Britain was saying goodbye to Mr. Kosygin. In the few days since he arrived at Heathrow, we have seen that usually serious face often break into smiles. The two prime ministers are on excellent terms. Mr. Kosygin had agreed to a hotline between number 10 and the Kremlin, and in every way, we and the Russians are far more in harmony than before the visit. Mr. Kosygin, for the time being, bade goodbye to Britain. As Scotland might say, well, you know, come back again.
London to New York in 3 hours, 17 minutes. That's the promise of the Concorde, taking shape at Filton in the Brabazon hangar. The Anglo-French supersonic airliners are pushing ahead towards completion. One here, one in France. They'll be the first faster-than-sound airliners in the world. 1,450 miles an hour, most of the way at 11 miles high. The present estimate, Concorde will give Britain and France a 3-year lead over America. Also at Filton, a full-scale mock-up of the aircraft. The British prototype will fly in autumn 1968. The last chance now for prospective buyers to suggest such minor changes as seating in the 186-foot fuselage, accommodating 136 passengers. A new era in airliners. Stones Reef, immovably aground on that graveyard of ships off Land's End, the Torrey Canyon. Spewed out of her more than 40,000 tons of crude oil, a colossal menace to holiday beaches. Safely ashore to Penzance were brought 32 members of the 61,000-ton tanker's crew. Most of the ship's company are Italians. The captain and 3 of his men remained aboard. Nobody at this stage could explain how the great vessel came to ground on the rocks. She is equipped with all modern navigational aids. First measures taken against the 100-square-mile oil slick, drifting less than 20 miles off the Cornish coast when these pictures were shot, were by a small flotilla of vessels spraying detergent. Then the drama took a fatal turn. An engine room explosion blew a hole through the deck. A flying hatch cover injured the captain of the Dutch salvage crew so severely that he died soon afterwards. salvage operations were resumed next day in hopes of refloating the ship at high water. Before that, it had been suggested that napalm be used to set fire to the oil both in the tanker and on the sea. In home waters, no oil menace on anything like this scale has ever occurred. Britain can pat herself on the back, whatever happens, for taking such prompt action to protect the beaches. A year to remember, a scene to remember. Sir Francis Chichester was almost home. A welcoming armada went out from Plymouth to greet the hero who had sailed round the world in a small boat, Gypsy Moth. It was one of those truly great events of 1967.
The Tower of London, a new kind of view. This is not often a place of change, and when there is, it makes news. Thousands come each year to see the crown jewels. This year, the magnificent regalia is in a new setting, an underground stronghold where the priceless treasures will be seen to the best advantage. The state trumpets and orders of India are set out in the upper chamber, together with maces and the beautiful sword of state. But it is down 2 flights of stairs to the heavily guarded, air-conditioned lower chamber where top-hatted wardens preside over some of the world's most historic and superb treasures. The coronation regalia, the ampulla and spoon, the Queen's orb, symbol of a world dominated by Christianity, and the sovereign scepter, a beautifully jeweled emblem of kingly power with its 530-carat diamond, largest of the 4 stars of Africa. The golden spurs made for the coronation of Charles II, together with these bracelets. And of course, the magnificent crowns. This is Queen Mary's crown. And this, the crown of India. The small diamond crown of Queen Victoria, and that of the Prince of Wales. St. Edward's crown, because of its weight, only briefly worn during coronations, and exchanged during the ceremony for the imperial state crown. A crown of gold, diamonds and pearls, and a massive ruby. A crown fit for a queen.
Isle of Wight, birthplace of the British hovercraft industry and a perfect place for enthusiasts of the home-built variety to show just what can be done with enthusiasm and skill, of course. It was the first national rally for sporting hovercraft ever held on the island. 22 enthusiasts took part in land speed and obstacle trials. Hovernauts, as they like to be called, come in all shapes and sizes. This one looks like the ideal. But she's not just a pretty face. There's no such thing as the weaker sex behind the controls of a hovercraft. Even the do-it-yourself variety of this amazing British invention can take most obstacles in its stride. Their maneuverability is still something to wonder at. Without doubt, there's a very big future ahead for the hovercraft in many fields of transportation, even perhaps on the road. Machines like this could be the hot rods of the future, but not yet. Wonder what he's getting all head up about. Well, perhaps he's heard the monkeys are in town.
Greenwich. There could be no finer setting for the final chapter in the great adventure story of a man and his boat. Thousands had come to see this historic occasion, to greet with a hero's welcome the man who was to be honored by his queen in public. And so, with his family, Sir Francis Chichester came ashore from the gallant 53-foot ketch, which had brought him alone but safely, full circle around the world to home. From here, 386 years ago, the first Queen Elizabeth knighted Sir Francis Drake. Now it was the turn of Sir Francis Chichester. With Sir Francis Drake's sword, the Queen was to dub the solo voyager as Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. The pink riband of the order rested on Sir Francis' shoulders. How right it was that he should be within sight of his beloved boat, a boat which had brought him 29,000 miles to the greatest honor of all. And there she was, travel-stained, but worthy of a royal visit. Queen Elizabeth II was honoring Gypsy Moth, her proud captain escorting the Queen to inspect her, just as did Sir Francis Drake to the Golden Hind with another Elizabeth.
It might have been that the Martians had landed. The police were taking no chances. 6 unidentified objects were found dotted across the south of England. 15-year-old Neil Beatty found this one. It looked like a flying saucer and certainly smelled like something out of this world. A year ago, the village of Warminster in Wiltshire hit the headlines. Unusual showers of meteorites rained down, followed by reports of saucer sightings. Immediately, a team from the British Unidentified Flying Objects Association went into action. Loaded down with equipment, they set up watching posts and prepared to give a host of what they hoped would be friendly little green men a welcome to Earth they'd never forget. And they waited, and waited, and nothing happened. But the men of the BUFO were not deterred. They reckoned that one day something would turn up, or rather come down. For a time, it seemed that predictions had come true when the sextet of saucers turned up. They looked genuine at first glance, perhaps a little on the small side, but who could say how big the visitors might be? Then came the moment of truth. It was a hoax. But you never can tell. On September 20th, at Clydebank, Britain's newest liner was launched. At last, the big secret was out. She was to bear the name Queen Elizabeth II. It was a fine tribute to Her Majesty who performed the launching ceremony. New Queen of the Seas was a proud sight. Cambridge. Trinity College waited to welcome a new freshman, and it's not every newcomer who's greeted by the master, Lord Butler. But then the new boy was the heir apparent to the throne, arriving in a Mini for a major step in his career. The occasion was both informal and formal, with Lord Butler introducing Prince Charles to Mr. Dennis Marion, the senior tutor. It was clear from the start that the college's motto, always the same, won't really apply for the next couple of years while the Prince studies archaeology and anthropology there. There was even a ceremony of the key, not quite Tower of London style, but a sign of independence for the royal teenager. Then, with Lord Butler, a stroll across the main square, a walk that will become familiar to the Prince in the months to come. For more than 400 years, countless other students have come to look on Trinity as home from home. And to help Prince Charles settle in, Robert Woods, a third-year student, took him on a short tour. First the reading room, and then to the Elizabethan dining hall, where with 230 other young men, he'll take his meals. The magnificent stained glass window was of special interest to the Prince, for it commemorates his royal predecessors who studied at Trinity. And so, a new boy joined the ranks of the freshmen at Cambridge, a student prince. Jodrell Bank. Britain's giant radio telescope listened in across 50 million miles of space to the new voice of the planet Venus. This is what it heard. That weird noise was music to the ears of earthbound scientists. It meant that Russian achievement had taken another major step towards the stars. And flying into Britain, which helped Russia achieve that magnificent space spectacular, by lending our ears, as it were, came Soviet space hero cosmonaut Valery Bukovsky. The Ilyushin airliner had brought the record-breaking Marathon Space Voyager to Britain on a 7-day visit at the invitation of the British-Soviet Friendship Society to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Bukovsky made the historic space rendezvous with the first woman cosmonaut 4 years ago. Here in the early light of day could be seen the full extent of the train crash, which claimed 55 lives. The night before, the normal quiet of this London suburb had been shattered. Ambulances, fire appliances and rescue workers had poured into the narrow streets near Hither Green Station. The Hastings Charing Cross Express crash was a bad one. The death toll mounted. At least 139 were injured, some seriously. The dreaded task of finding victims went on non-stop throughout the night. Stretcher after stretcher was brought through from the scene of Britain's worst train disaster for 10 years. For some, there was nothing that could be done. When the express left the rails, it was traveling at high speed, normal on this stretch of line. Again, the unsuspected claimed its victims. They were clamped in the tangled masses of metal. When day came, the red-rimmed eyes of the rescue workers told as much of the harrowing story as the wreckage itself. In 2 days, 92 people had died. It was a black weekend in Britain. The newspapers posed questions, but facts were facts. The pound had been devalued. On Monday, after the announcement, the stock exchange was empty. There was no trading. But outside in Throgmorton Street, brokers and jobbers crowded together, not to carry on business, but to try and sort out what the drop in the pound's value would mean to them when they started work next morning. There was no point in going to the bank. They were all closed for the day, while their staffs made necessary adjustments. It seemed to be a black, moneyless Monday. But facing facts, and we all have to, we were told devaluation would mean bigger and better export sales, more employment, and the chance to get the nation back on its financial feet. But the following day, there was plenty of action at the stock exchange. The long weekend was over. Westminster Abbey. In the beauty and peace of this holy place, 2,000 people gathered to pay final tribute to Earl Atleys, the ashes of the great man who was Prime Minister from 1945 to 1951, were going to their last resting place. And so the procession escorting the casket, carried by the Clerk of Works, solemnly made its way to the shallow grave, not far from that of the unknown warrior. Earl Atleys' family followed, sadly but proud in the knowledge that only the truly great rest here, and placing by the grave the orders and decorations of the man who became his friend, Charles Griffiths, his former batman. Here was the moment of interment. Earl Atleys' granddaughter stepped forward to lay a simple wreath by the tomb. Here, the remains of Earl Atleys will rest forever. The Duke of Kent, representing the Queen, paid tribute. Two red pandas made their very cute debut before the British public. They were bought recently from a German zoo. Now that routine checks on their health have been carried out, they're the first of their breed on view in London for 5 years. They're called Rama and Suka. Everyone seemed keen to make a fuss with them. Big cousin Chi-Chi is not used to sharing the limelight, but Rama and Suka, male and female respectively, may be able to teach her a few things about marital bliss before she meets Annan again. Toulouse, the giant hangar at Sud Aviation's headquarters, was the focal point of the world. For inside was the most exciting new thing in the world of aviation, Concorde number 001. The giant gleaming white dart, which points the way to the supersonic future of intercontinental transport, was about to make its public debut. At last, the Anglo-French brainchild, born out of the technical and very sensible collaboration of two nations, could be shown to an envious world, at least 5 years before any rival. Mr. Wedgwood Ben, Minister of Technology, and Monsieur Jean Chamon, the French Minister of Transport, were ready to cut the tapes and launch the greatest airliner ever built. Monsieur Chamon greeted airline representatives, including space helmeted hostess Mon Davis. Mr. Wedgwood Ben also had a warm word of welcome for the visitors who had come to see this magnificent moment as Concorde majestically rolled out into the open. English and French technicians proudly watched the result of their work being admired. Theirs was cooperation on a grand scale. For the two ministers, also a time of happy unity. Mr. Wedgwood Ben had settled a point of conflict over the 1,500-mile-an-hour bird. Concorde was to be spelled the French way, with an E. From now on, it's an E-type Concorde. Concorde was in accord. Britain and France in partnership. Concorde looked good, and certainly will be proved good when it flies at the end of February. That job will be up to test pilots André Turca and Brian Trubshaw. Together, Britain and France look set for a supersonic boom time with Concorde.
1967 was the year that flower power came to Britain, and the 60s revolution began to change course. Teenagers started to try and put into practice the philosophies that were emerging from alternative forms of culture. Some made attempts to create new lifestyles. The pop phenomena of supergroups continued, and America tried to rival the Beatles with their own Fab Four, the Monkees. Pathé News kept cinema audiences up to date and ensured that those less interested in the swinging 60s got their fair share of sporting entertainment.
The photo call at Teddington Studios was a gathering of fame and beauty. Patrick McNee posed with Twiggy. The Avengers star didn't want to steal the picture. He shared it with the internationally famous model. Similarly, Diana Rigg was photographed with George Manners. Everybody present had earned distinction. George as an amateur Olympics weightlifter. Much more pleasant than lifting a barbell. The main object of the call was to display the clothes and fashions the Avengers are wearing in their new series. Olympic star Linda Ludgrove, like the actors themselves, has fans in almost every country. When he was champion jockey over the sticks, Josh Gifford won his fame. Now he was admiring Diana in Alan Hughes' designs for the role of Emma Peel. Pierre Cardin's designs are eminently right for John Steed. The Avengers are already big dollar earners for Britain. Helping to dress the set, Graham Hill. He's photographed as much as the stars these days. Good luck to all concerned. More dollars urgently wanted. Brides-to-be, take a good look. Because if you're of a with-it disposition, this is the sort of outfit you may well want to wear for the great occasion. It's the very latest, a Bridal Gear gown. Matching outfits, too, featured in a display of new nuptial styles at a London fashion show. Bride and bridesmaid, naturally. They call this wedding day special Soft Shoe Shuffle. And how about this for a big day trio? Mod bride, gear groom, and bridesmaid to match. Quite a wedding group. They call this bridesmaid's outfit rave. Description, frilly pajama style with ruffs round the sleeves matching those on the pants. Enter the bride. Her gown's called the swinger. It had to come, the time when Carnaby Street-style creations gave a new line to blushing brides. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. Heartthrob pop singer Elvis Presley is a real-life bridegroom at last. 8 years ago, when he was a soldier in Germany, he met Priscilla Beaulieu, daughter of a U.S. lieutenant colonel who was also serving out there. As she was then only 14, they had to wait a bit. Now, who could say who was the luckier, the pelvis or pretty Priscilla? The millionaire film star singer, in bride choosing as in everything else, a terrific success. Jack Brabham, all set in his Repco Brabham for the Dutch Grand Prix, driving a Honda John Surtees. 17 cars lined up. Back in the third row, Jim Clark, his first time out in a remarkable new Lotus Ford. "90 laps of the circuit, 235 miles in all. Clark biding his time. John Surtees. Dennis Hume. Chris Irwin. Graham Hill had to retire with engine trouble. With Graham Hill out of the running, Clark took the lead. At an average of 104.4, a great triumph for an untried car, Jim Clark won the Dutch Grand Prix for the 4th time.
All set for the Battle of the Giants. Mike Hailwood's Honda gets a last check over under the champ's watchful eye. Nearby, ready for action on an MV Agusta, Italian motorcycle star Giacomo Agostini. The race, the Diamond Jubilee Senior TT. There was a big lineup of starters, but in this event, only 2 men mattered. Hailwood, number 4. Agostini, number 9. It was clear the pace was going to be hot. Hailwood and Agostini were forcing the field along at a cracking pace. Hailwood was getting every last bit of power out of his big machine, and Agostini was closing up. The rest of the riders were just making up numbers. Hailwood had rocketed the lap record to 108.77 miles per hour. Agostini was with him. But then, tragedy for the Italian. On the 5th of the 6-lap race, the Agusta's chain broke. Agostini was out of the race. There was nothing to stop the great Mike Hailwood. His winning time, a record 105.62 miles per hour.
Ready to roll to Weybridge, a gypsy-type caravan. A present for a 4-year-old who probably has everything. The name, Julian Lennon, son of John Lennon, who else but the Beatle. It's about £4,000 worth of gaily painted, renovated rolling stock. A big toy for a little boy. It even needed a police escort. But then, it's not every dad that spends that sort of money on his youngster. This might be one occasion when money can buy love. And so the wagon rolled west, onward towards Weybridge and the Lennon homestead. Sometimes the going got tough. The pity of it all was that young Julian wasn't there to see his present arrive. He was on holiday with Mum and Dad. If he ever decides to leave home, and it seems hardly likely, he'll be the best equipped gypsy on the road. And at Heathrow Airport, there was no mistaking that Peter, Davy, Mike and Mickey were on their way. What seemed like a highly trained team of hysterical teenage miniskirters could hardly bear the excitement as the monkeys landed. Yep, there they were, long hair, with gear, everything to make the fans go wild. The monkeys certainly couldn't have been disappointed with the reception. Naturally, the press were there, ready for anything to happen. They weren't disappointed. Where there's a will, there's always a way through any barrier. It certainly was way out, and that's the way one of the monkeys headed. The group know their brand of monkey business means big business, and they gave the press the full treatment. Questions? Well, they were asked quite a few, but being the monkeys, nobody really expected a straight answer. They didn't get one.
London. It's years since such crowds gathered to await an appeal verdict. But this was the Rolling Stones case, with the fans out in force. When Mick Jagger was conditionally discharged and Keith Richards' sentence quashed, the pop idols drove off, the shadow of jail no longer over them. Mick held a press conference in Soho soon afterwards. Keith had chicken pox, so couldn't be there. But Marianne Faithfull was present, delighted with the verdict. Mick and Marianne were on top of the world again, and so were their millions of fans. For the press, the verdict was front-page news throughout the Western world.
When Mary Quant invades new realms of fashion, bright young girls are interested, and so is the national press. As the outcome of 2 years' hard work, Mary has perfected the very thing the new generation had been hoping for. Boots and shoes that are distinctive, comfortable, washable, and nearly indestructible. Mary believes that footwear should fit like a glove. Wear the latest kind when you're young, and in later life, you'll never complain that your feet are killing you. That sounds like a wonderful future, viewed from any angle. Next season's forecast, thigh-length boots, high enough to reach the hem of the skirt. In fashion, new ideas come up from some of the most unlikely places. If you think boots must be all in one piece, observe the detachable top, which comes off with a zip, either for wearing as shoes or with other tops of different colors. And with all the new materials, the saying, "there's nothing like leather," is old hat. Being stuck with the same clothes all the year round, the terrier turns his back on the fashion world. We don't, of course. Dunstable. Revived interest in ballooning was much in evidence at the London Gliding Club's air display. Don Picard's hot air variety uses propane burners underneath the bag. It soon becomes lighter than the atmosphere, and up it goes. Gas-filled balloons were also there, and so were several gliders. But undoubtedly what stole the show were the flying machines of World War I vintage, notably the Fokker. A Vickers gun bus of the same period accepted the German challenge. With such crude gun mountings, pilots fought the crucial dogfights of those days. Parachutes towed into the air by cars reduce the cost for the learner. He gets the hang of the art without having to hire a plane to jump from in the novice stage. A girl stood up to an 80-mile-an-hour slipstream on top of the wing, recalling the stunts performed in the 20s. Had she fallen, she might have dropped into nearby Woburn Park, the seat of the Duke of Bedford, where the flower people attended a love-in in ducal surroundings. Here again, Don Picard demonstrated the hot air balloon. The idea was first used in France nearly 200 years ago. A sense in hydrogen-filled balloons cost 200 pounds a flight for the gas. Hot air, as every public speaker knows, is very much cheaper. Teenagers filled the balloon basket with carnations for Picard to distribute among the flower people. Our people believe that life should be lived in kindness, peace, gentleness, and love. For 3 days at Woburn Park, they paid 30 shillings each, and the weather was wonderful. You really want it fine and sunny for a love-in. Whether the new philosophy will develop into a nationwide cult or fade away like the flowers themselves remains to be seen. The dog had an open mind about it. Eurocoiffure 67, they called it, and it proved a magnet for some of Britain and the continent's top mop manipulators. They'd all gathered at the seaside to make public their crowning glory creations at a time when female fashions guide the male eye to everywhere but the head. So there's plenty of room at the top to refocus eyes from dresses to tresses. It's almost pure art the way hairdressers like Vidal Sassoon produce new styles. He, of course, is a world leader in this field. But every other exhibitor at the coiffure convention was out to show that they too had some heady ideas, both for themselves and their models. But there are some people who are never satisfied. While Samson could really use a touch more on top, the Delilah trend these days is ridiculous. A hairpiece for him covers up those wide open spaces. For her, it's nothing more than an instant hairdo. It's the same old story. The more you got, the more you want. London, the unmistakable calling cards of Steed. The immaculate Avenger was introducing his new TV teammate. She's Linda Thorson, a 20-year-old good-looker from Canada who joins Patrick McNee as his third leading lady in the Avengers series. And there's plenty to celebrate, for the show is a hit everywhere, especially in America, where it's a big dollar earner for Britain. The press turned out in force to meet Linda, who was chosen from 200 actresses to star as Steed's new playmate, Miss Tara King. She follows in the footsteps of Diana Rigg and Honor Blackman. But she won't be an Emma Peel or Kathy Gale. Tara will foil the bad men with femininity. She's got plenty of that.
1967 was a year marked by stark contrast. The conflict in Vietnam and the growing flower power movement. Youth seemed to offer hope for a peaceful future. Observers asked whether their optimism would last. In 1967, they said that only history could judge. 1967, a year to remember.